CRPN Central, this is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe. It helps the mission more than you know so that I can do more for you. Welcome to another Monday, everyone. A big announcement. For one, it's August. Can you believe it? Already August. For two, how many of you are a fan of the board game called Final Girl? So Final Girl, if you're a fan of that, Season 4 is shipping out to all of the fans right now. And we are super stoked. So if you haven't checked out Final Girl, I would highly recommend it. We have a blast. Bree and I both love playing it together, and that's kind of hard. It's hard to find something that we're both very interested in. So super stoked about getting our Final Girl things. Big thank you to Van Ryder Games for creating games that people of all different interests can enjoy. So welcome to TrialSide Chats, the place where we come together, talk about the industry. We talk about a lot of the things that maybe some people aren't going to talk about. And then we're going to try to identify ways to make things better for everyone. And I mean everyone. It's not like a tug of war where one person wins and the other loses. We're going to try to find that neutral ground where everyone wins. Rising tides, everyone. Rising tides. Full disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. Never said I was a lawyer. And as a result, this and what you're watching is the culmination of experience in the industry. Please, please, please watch at your own discretion, watch at your own risk. Should you choose to do something as a result of this video, please know that it will be at your own risk. By continuing this video, you have agreed to this disclaimer, and now let's get going. So we're going to talk about the ground rules. We're going to talk about anything finance. This is a very, very sensitive subject, must be confidential, no exceptions. We're not going to talk names. We're not going to talk organizations. We're only talking concepts and potential best practices that can help everyone. Oh, I love this question. It's one of my favorite questions in the industry when we come to it. How can I network in this industry? There's just so much out there. Yes, I agree. So if you are beginning in the industry, if you're just starting out in clinical research, it's literally like drinking from a fire hose. There are so many different outlets. There are entire podcasts dedicated to this one question. I would highly recommend that would be one source to try to figure it out. For me, I live in the middle of a cornfield. That's why my internet's terrible. The only reason why I can network and be part of a global industry is, of course, through virtual mechanisms. LinkedIn. If you are not on LinkedIn actively, if you're not having those conversations with the clinical research industry, it's one of the very, very first things that I would do. That's like the gateway network. So you could identify people that you are interested in having conversations with. You can have sidebars, you can have chats, you can learn about conferences, whatever it might be. But not only should you be like looking at LinkedIn, but pay attention to a lot of the people who are posting all the time and look at the comments, the people who are commenting on that. It's not going to take you very long to build your network and to try to learn and understand who is specialized in what area of clinical research when you do this. That's only the start. And before you know it, you're going to turn into like a clinical research historian where you're going to see all of the different cool things that people do. You're going to remember things. You're going to watch people jump from one company to the other. You're going to watch this big hopeful company rise up and then sizzle out. You're going to watch some companies succeed, and you're going to watch a lot of companies fail. So as you continue to go through the network and the industry, you're going to find the patterns. So that would be my first recommendation, is just go to LinkedIn and start from there. All right, so we're going to continue our journey down the book. The book and the journey is almost over, so we'll be done seeing this slide in a little bit. That right there is the QR code that should take you to Amazon. The link is below. If you'd like to buy it directly from CRPN, please feel free to reach out. We can send it to you at 10% off and then free shipping. Big congratulations to Brad Hightower. Really, really cool paper. It's a case study on private sites and best practices for financial best interest. And so validated methods. A lot of the methods are also the same things in the book. And it's really, really cool to see the data start to support all of the theories. All right. So we are knee deep in phase 2. This is trial management. We're in accrual world. Last week, we talked about auto pay accrual specifically. all those visits and things that are supposed to be paid automatically. This week is the big one. So invoice accrual. We do a lot of audits at sites, and we have found millions of dollars for sites. And most of the time, those millions of dollars are not claimed at sites because of this topic right here, invoices, right? Seems super easy. You write something on a document, you say, hey, you owe us this money, send it in, and then you hope to get paid. It's a lot more difficult than that, and there are so many different ways to mess up. I'm pretty sure that if there's a way that an invoice could be messed up, I think I've seen it. So how have you seen invoices messed up in your industry? I would love to hear the stories. We can start talking shop here, try to figure out how to prevent some of it. So the theory behind an invoice is an invoice itself is an official document, a financial document that is sent to the sponsor. And on that list, on that document, is a list of all of the different things that have happened at the site that the sponsor is contractually obligated to pay. That's very, very important. Very, very important. The sponsor is contractually obligated to pay. A lot of people just make a bunch of invoices and send them out without checking the contract. Oh, we spent the money. It's for this trial. Therefore, we're going to send out the invoice and we're going to get paid. Those people are going to be very disappointed. The invoice is directly linked to the contract. Theory that you do work and you do it according to contract. You communicate it between all of your team members. You put it on a list of all of the different invoice accrual that you have created. Then you create an invoice. Here we go. Here's an invoice. Send it in. And then within the contractual term of the invoice, in other words, the sponsor is going to get the invoice and they have so many days to pay that invoice, then a site gets paid. That is the theory behind it. But it never, ever, ever happens like that. And so let's start diving into invoices, specifically that document you create with accrual that you have accumulated as a result of performing a trial. There's a lot of invoice rules around here, and some of these rules you have to look at the contract. Every single trial is going to have a different set of invoicing rules. Think about that, sites. It's almost like you're having to run like multiple businesses at the same time, because every single one of those businesses follow literally a legally agreed upon set of rules that are totally different from each other. Imagine that, creating logistics every single trial at a time in a way to send invoices. Most of the time, the invoice standard averages out to always have a logo. It's an official document from your company. You're gonna have a logo. That invoice is going to need to include the protocol ID, of course, your site ID or your site number, which is specific to every trial. Many of the sponsors out there, especially the very, very large ones, also require a PO number. So in the big, like when you're working with the big guys, you're going to sign the CTA. And then once the CTA goes through, it executes a purchase order or purchase order number. You have to have that PO number before you can send any invoice. So you know how most of the time you sign a CTA, you send out the startup and you're good? You have an extra step when it comes to working with the big guys. Make sure that you don't need a PO number prior to sending that startup invoice. And then you have to check your CTA for additional invoice or information as required. So this isn't everything, right? Sometimes the CTA requires you to include the PI's NPI number, for example, the National Provider Index number. Sometimes it requires you to put your bank information on the bottom of the invoice. If you're working with little guys, they want that bank information on the bottom of the invoice. You have to watch the CTA and you have to make sure that you're following the rules for every single trial. Now, invoices are not protected documents. These are financial documents that are going to go through unsecured servers, probably through accountants. It's not through clinicians. And so as a result, you absolutely 100%, 150% have to make sure that all invoices are fully HIPAA compliant. Do not include HIPAA sensitive information in an invoice. You also, and this is where I run into this all the time, a site says, okay, I want you to send an invoice. Just go ahead. We paid this. Go send the invoice. And I said, it's not in the contract. I don't care. Just send the invoice anyway. So then we go through the time to make the invoice. We go through the time to chase the invoice, and it is 100% guaranteed to be rejected because the site just throws things on an invoice and sends it out without validating it is contractual and obligate. It's a contractual obligation. Okay. And then the other thing to really note about invoicing is you don't have to write a novel. You really only want to include the information that is required, just enough information so that whoever is reading that invoice knows, okay, this is according to contract, and so this was spent, and so then we have to reimburse. We have to pay for that invoice. I've seen sites, especially in chart review. Chart review is terrible. So there's chart review, pre-screening, things like that, where sites are putting on invoice line items things that are not necessary to make the decision to pay for that invoice, like entire inclusion exclusion criteria that's very, very sensitive to the patient. Even if it's HIPAA compliant, it starts telling a clinical story that doesn't have to be on an invoice. Don't do that. Don't do that. You know, if you're going to do pre-screening, you can leave out the details, link it to the contract, link a value, and send it. If they want additional information, you can talk about that at your discretion later. All right, so invoices, and we talked about this before. So when does the invoice accrual timeline begin? This is not when the service is performed, because until that service is on an invoice and until that invoice is sent, it is not 100% guaranteed revenue. That is probably where the audit comes in. We go through, we do an audit, there's all this stuff that's not on an invoice. It was never accrued because it was never on an invoice. Sure, you quote earned it, but you also have the risk of losing it, specifically in research with the IWO, the invoiceable window of opportunity. Now, this is on page 71 of the book. There's a huge explanation about IWOs, but what it boils down to, sites, is if you don't invoice within a certain amount of time, you forfeit the money. It doesn't matter if you are contractually owed it. You have given the sponsor a loophole. So most of the time, IWOs start in a contract by the occurrence of something being performed. Now we get into the service date, right? So if you have a service date that is older than 90 days, if you waited 3 months to send an invoice, depending on your contract and depending on how nice the sponsor can be, you've probably just forfeited your ability to invoice for that, even if you did the service. So this is a way of redlining an IWO to make it a little more flexible for you, sites. You absolutely have to have a long stop. You can't wait 10 years and then build a sponsor later for something that happened a decade ago. You're going to have a point of no return where you're not going to be allowed to bill, but that should not be by occurrence. Ideally, you want your IWO to be by site closeout. In other words, as long as you're running that trial, you should be able to invoice for whatever you have performed. We've done the audits, guys. I get it. People get super busy. Years and years and years go by. There's so many different ways to miss out on money that you just lose track. You stay busy trying to see patients and you never get around to it. So sponsors and CROs really, really want to encourage sites to invoice routinely and on track and not wait for this giant bolus responsibility at the end or sometime in the middle of the trial. So they put in this long stop. If you can't get your stuff together and you can't bill us within 3 months of something happening, well, obviously you didn't want the money that much. That's kind of the logic behind it. And so you're going to see incurring such expenses as a timeline of your IWO. And most of the time, maybe 80%, you can negotiate that to site closeout. You're going to have some sticklers. They're going to insist on it. And I've really only seen one sponsor play the IWO card saying, oh, sorry, you waited too long. We're not going to pay it. So most of the time at a sponsor's discretion, they're still going to try to pay it. But sites, if you really want to save yourself, you really need to try to push for IWOs by site closeout. All right. So how do we collect the invoice accrual? Now, we kind of talked about this back on the last week, but there's always the quick reference. Quick reference is probably one of your biggest strengths to communicate the need for having all of your team members to communicate invoiceable activity to your finance team as soon as it happens. Quick references are key for things like regulatory activity, protocol amendments, monitoring visits, IND safety reports, continuing reviews and annual fees, anything like that. You don't always get to invoice for it. So it's really, really important so that your team knows when to tell your finance team about something that has happened. Now, if your CTMS is programmed properly and CTMS can handle something that is not associated to patients, then you can absolutely program that in, make it a review of the calendar, whatever it might be. But between the quick references and the communication plans, you should be able to capture the majority of the invoicing that you need across pillars. Now, CTMS, you pull accrual reports. The CTMS is really, really good at pulling operations pillar invoiceables. If there were labs or radiology or anything that has happened for the patient that was plugged into the CTMS and it triggers an invoiceable activity, well, there it goes. But we just found a situation where the CTMS was programmed so the invoiceables were programmed as autopay. So they went in as autopay, they aged out, they hit IWO, and then the site forfeited the opportunity to invoice for it. And there's also portals. So portals are really, really big, especially in like regulatory. So there's portals everywhere. So you should be able to go into the regulatory portal sometimes and be able to pull the information that you need to send the invoices. Just be sure that you're collaborating with your regulatory team when it comes to using those portals, because you don't want to go invoice for something that the regulatory team has not yet worked. There's documents. So that's huge when it comes to justification. And that is a really, really big thing in invoices is the justification, specifically receipts and reimbursements or POs, or depending on how the contract is written, you may need to have documentation for dry ice or an MRI or anything. So I can tell you right now that CROs will err on the benefit of caution, and they'll pretty much just make you send documentation justification for everything, even though they have more access to it than you do. It's just another hoop to jump through. They don't want to get stuck with the bill. They want to make sure that all documentation is there. The big push right now, and that's super concerning, is monitoring reports. They're starting to ask for monitoring reports when you invoice for monitoring visits, even though they have a direct link to the CRA. Some of them do, but it becomes very problematic because there's very confidential information in those monitoring reports that should not be going through financial servers. So CROs, the guys who are trying to push for documentation and another hoop for sites to jump through on these things, highly recommend that we try to figure out a way to streamline this in a way that reduces the liabilities of all parties and at the same time allows you to have what you need to process the payment. And then finally, receipts and reimbursements. We'll talk about that more, but I literally just had this conversation. Someone said, hey, I want to bill for all my advertising. And I said, okay, where's your documentation? Well, I don't have it yet. You need documentation, otherwise this is going to be rejected. Well, go bill it anyway. No, I'm not wasting my time on an invoice that I know at a 100% rate will be rejected. If you want your advertising to be sent, you need two pieces of documentation and justification. The first is your third-party quote for the advertising. The first. The second is the sponsor's approval of that third-party quote. Until we have the quote and the sponsor approval to add to the invoice, there is literally no point in sending that and having it rejected. I just saved everyone time. You're welcome, CROs. I love you guys. So, for example, here, let's talk about some of the accrual that I know that is invoiceable. Let's say that we had a visit that had dry ice, and I looked at the contract and say, well, you have to have documentation of the purchase of dry ice. Well, I would end up going to the site and say, where's the documentation for the dry ice? I need that if you want me to invoice for this. Well, I didn't get documentation. Well, and I can't invoice for it. You just lost $50 because you didn't collect a piece of paper and send it to me. That's it. That's all there is to it. It's behavior. We have to change the behavior. MRI. Looks like there's no docs. We'll just bill for it. Done. A visit for a phone call. We confirmed it. It's in EDC. We're ready to invoice for it. And finally, travel. So hotel, gas receipts, meals, check your contract, make sure that it is payable, get sponsor approval for special things. If you're at like a cap or something and the patient has to come from a long way away, make sure you have that sponsor approval of the costs before sending the invoices, which means you need documents with that. And then if you get all of your pieces of information together before you send the invoice and before you're working aging on something that you know is going to be rejected or broken, you're going to save everyone time and you're going to streamline the invoice process so that every invoice that you send out is also going to be approved, paid without additional effort. And here's an example, a beautiful example coming out of page 112. This is an invoice. It looks like many of the other invoices that you might see. You've got your logo, you've got your site information next to the logo. Little box here, you don't have to have a box, but you have an invoice identifier, when it was sent, your term, when it was due. You have your billing too. So this is probably where you come from the contract. Make sure that you match where you need to send the invoice to on your invoice. And if needed, add the email address that you use. That's just like the sponsor contact information who is receiving the invoice. Then comes your itemization, your list. Generally, you say, what is it? How much of it are you billing for? What's the unit price? And what's your total amount? You have a general total at the bottom. At the bottom, it's very special clinical research things. Protocol ID, PI name, site number. Those are the three cardinal rules of invoices. If you can have those three things at all times, you're going to triangulate the entire system so that you can find that invoice, find the trial, find the obligation anytime. That's also what you have to share with sponsors and CROs. If you try to dispute this or work aging or things like that, they're going to need those three pieces of information plus your invoice number, and you should be able to figure out what's going on. And don't forget that PO number whenever you need it. I just got on a soapbox about this. We're going to talk about it again. No documents that you need. Plus, if it's just willy-nilly not in the CTA, equals you're going to have a rejected invoice and you're wasting everyone's time. So let's just cut this off at the beginning, get a good process in place. If you can send a good invoice with all that information, there will not be a reason to reject your invoice. So a couple examples, you are probably, this is many times the only justification you need. Some email PDF of a sponsor email. Sponsor emails, you said, yes, I approve this cost. Please send the invoice. Put that email as an attachment of justification onto your invoice. And then whoever's processing that, probably a totally different team somewhere, they're going to see that you did your work, you have the approvals, and they're going to process your invoice. They may come back for a question, and that's okay. That's their job. But the fact is, your objective is to give them whatever pieces of information that they need to do their job so that you can get paid. In addition, it's very important if you're going to have receipts for justification that you have to make sure it's HIPAA compliant. You need to be able to have the ability to redact. Do not put HIPAA sensitive information in these invoices. You need to redact anything that has to do with the patient identifiers, their credit card number, addresses, anything like that. Ideally, the only thing they really need to see on a receipt is evidence that it was a cost, and ideally that it was around the visit date of whatever it is that you're trying to do. Like if a patient had to go travel for their screening date, the date needs to be the same as what the patient did. But look at all the redaction, everyone. It's really, really important. If you do this stuff and it gets really, really sensitive, we actually had one where we had to redact that this person was a smoker. It says they were in a smoking room, non-smoking room. Be very, very careful when it comes to receipts. They have to be worked very carefully. All right, so you have your invoice, you have your documentations. It's time to save your file. I can't tell you how important this is. I feel like a librarian right now, but figure out a nomenclature so that you can save your file so you can rapidly retrieve this. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. One of my favorites, it follows the same context as the other one, but you say it's a giant big bold words in the beginning. Invoice. This is an invoice. This is how much it's worth. Here's the invoice number identifier, sponsor, protocol, and then the date that you invoice for. With all of that information put into a library, you should be able to rapidly retrieve whatever invoices you need when it comes to troubleshooting later. And so if you do this right now, you're going to thank yourself when we get into the aging process. And I can explain about that in another episode. Time to send it. We have the invoice documents. We've saved the file. It's time to send this. So what in the heck are we going to do here? Well, there's best, backup, and worst. And so this is the soapbox that I'm going to try not to get on, but I want to try to explain the logic behind it. In a perfect situation, in a best situation, you as a finance team, you're in accounting software, QuickBooks, Sage, whatever your accounting software is, you're building that invoice, boom, 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 you're making justification, you're saving it. You hit a button and bam, it automatically sends it off to wherever you need to go. So the email address itself is in your accounting software. It sends the email, it automatically updates your books. It tracks whether or not the sponsor is viewing it or not. It auto ages it and sends auto emails wherever it might be. You are set until it's paid or until it's disputed. You're good to go. Hands off from there. That is why that is the best option, because it is the least manual for the site. Backup. Let's say you're not doing accounting software. Let's say that you're not allowed to use accounting software because your leadership doesn't want you to. So you're still going to do a similar process, but instead of having the accounting software do the emails, you're going to have to go into an email address, send an email, hey, here you go, this is what I have. And then after you're done sending the email to whatever email address is in the contract, you're going to have to go into the accounting software, say, hey, I sent in this invoice, and then it's still going to be aged revenue, but there's going to be a disconnect between the aging and follow-up and what ended up having to do for the email. So you're in charge of the aging. You're going to have to go through a list and email whenever it comes to aging. You also don't know if it was ever viewed. So, it could be you just send it off into the void and you hope that someone reads it. Unless you get into a habit of doing read receipts on every single one, that is going to be something that you're not going to have a strength into. So it's a little more manual. You're going to have to touch it a little bit more. And odds are you're going to have to put more effort into managing and maintaining that accrual. Worst, hands down, there's my soapbox, and there's so many different reasons why you have to create. Well, no, you can't even create an invoice because most sponsor portals require you to plug in one line item at a time, which means you have to create an invoice. You have to dissect out the line items of the invoice. You have to go into the sponsor portal, and you have to re-enter every single invoice at a time, every single line item. And then after that, you're going to have to go back into your accounting software, list the invoice, link the invoice to the sponsor portal entries, and then hope you can still access the portal, because the sponsor or vendor could easily just say, okay, well, rejected, or you lost an employee. Oh, well, that employee doesn't work here anymore. They don't have access, and it takes you 6 months to get a new one. Many of the times when these portals happen, it's you got 90 days and then we're turning it off because we want to pay for the licensure. So you better grab what you can out of the portal, while you still have access, and then it's the point of no return. Even if you have an IWO of 180 days after closeout, you're screwed because you can't submit anything to the portal. So sorry. Or it's misprogrammed. You take line items out of your invoice, they're all contractually valid. You go into the portal, hey, I have IND safety reports, boom, boom, boom. Oh, wait, what do you mean I can't do it anymore? Well, IND safety reports were capped at 10 and you're contractually obligated for 50. The portal was misprogrammed, which means now you have no good legal direction to request funding from the sponsor portal. I can go on, but what is really bad about it, and this is the cringe of all portals, is you can't age it. There is literally no one to talk to. Hey, this is 100 days late. What's going on? There's a happy little bot at the bottom. Sometimes it's contact this customer service email. It goes nowhere. It literally takes you to this loop where you cannot find the person to talk to age your revenue. There's no source of communication. It's like a one-way radio. Major liability. And as a result, sponsor portals are the worst way to request well, it's not even an invoice at this point because you have to totally dissect the invoice and enter it, but the worst. And 5 times the work for every site. Highly recommend portals. Just make an SOP. Can't use portals. Any trial that forces portals, it's not worth your time, quite literally. And I'm sorry to say that, vendors, but I have seen sites get burned way too many times on this. Future. So let's just be real here. The portals are pretty much just like self-service things so that people save money. Well, in a world of self-service, maybe AI can fix that. The best portal for a site is the one that a site doesn't have to log into. So maybe there's just gonna in the future be an email to send. Site sends the email because they're in control of that. They can do follow-up on that. It'll go to some AI bot who can do all the portal entry on the back end. Sites don't have to deal with it. And then whenever things happen, that AI bot can just respond to the site's email and everything can be fine. So tech vendors who are making portals, I dare you to manage a site. I dare you. And when you're managing 200 trials that each want a portal each, yeah, you'll go crazy too. So I don't want to hear it. All right. So the funny thing is, let's say you have a portal. Let's say you have accounting software. Let's say that you're as efficient as possible. Guess what? This is going to come up in aging, but you're still going to have to send emails. Sorry, everyone. You can't get away from the emails. We have accounting software or we go through the portal and I go to aging. And what's the very first thing that payments person says? Do you want to know what it is? Send me the email or email me the invoice and I'll take a look. They're not even going to look in the portal. They're just going to expect you to send them the document so that they can look at it to see what the problem is. So you're going to have to learn how to send an email, even if you're as efficient as you want to try to be. And so this is a really great way to format it. It's going to go to whatever email address you have been instructed to send it to, hopefully in the contract. For the guys or the CROs who like to hide that because they want you to use their portal, come talk to me. There are emails that you can send. They don't really advertise it, but we can make sure that goes to the right person. So whatever it is, you're sending it to the assigned email address. You have a subject line. This subject line is really important, especially when it comes to a lot of sponsors and CROs will program rules to auto assign emails to certain folders. This is also very good when it comes to the future of AI bots and doing what it is. So make sure that when you craft your email, make sure it's a very specific subject line. It needs to be the invoice number. You can always search your email by invoice number. There it is. Your sponsor, protocol, your PI site. There it is. Protocol, PI site. Your 3 things that you can do to triangulate where you are in the trial. And if you have to put a PO in number, that's fine. Sometimes you don't. And then you're going to have to attach a document. Ideally, you want it to be in PDF format. I prefer like Outlook and anything that has the attachments on the top of the page. I know that my Google friends out there just put the attachments on the bottom of the page, and it's a big pain in the butt to try to access. But then you're just going to see an email, hey, please see the attached invoice for this trial. Thank you. You don't have to write a novel here. Odds are it's probably just going to be a bot reading it, but they also want to know that you're not a bot. So you can try to have a little fun with it, but I wouldn't put too much time into writing your email. But this format can be used to actually send the invoices. So if you're on that, the plan B, the backup, where you have to send emails every single time to send an invoice, is a great format to try to follow. This is also a really, really good format in aging, and we may come back to this and adjust it a little bit. All right, so we just sent our justifications and our invoices, and everything is wonderful. And now we've got invoice aging or invoice accrual. We've got all of these invoices here, and something's not quite right when it comes to these. So invoice number 1159, it looks like we sent it a long time ago, back in 2024. It is now 861 days old. That sucker is older than some kids now. But the important thing is the comments. So it looks like back in 2024, someone decided it'd be a great idea to send an invoice for a beer garden outreach. It's a novel idea, but just by looking at that, I could almost say, well, obviously they're not paying it for some reason, and why. So if I look at it and looks like they didn't get sponsor approval for this effort. They did the beer garden outreach and they recruited 3 patients as a result, but they didn't do their homework. They didn't do the pre-approval. And so as a result, odds are you're probably going to have to void that invoice, everyone. You didn't do your due diligence and you didn't follow the rules, so you had to eat those costs. Looks like invoice 1160, 366 days old for ECGs. Something's wrong here. If we're doing ECGs, is it, and why? So we're going to have to, for one, you should never have something that old if you're working aging. You should have had an answer a long, long time ago. But 2, just by looking at that, maybe they didn't include documentation and they had to have documentation of ECGs. Maybe it wasn't entered into the EDC. And so as a result, it's not going to get paid. Sponsors and CROs will not volunteer to you reasons why they're not going to pay you. They're just going to let it go, everyone. So you have to be on top of it. If I saw that, I'd be like, yeah, we need to try to figure this out. 1, just get the old money off the books. Either get it paid or get it voided, but that is a bad metric that you don't want. And then finally, looks like invoice 1161, it's minus 29 days old, so it's not even due yet. It's stipend, so we have time on that. But the one thing I should note, there's one more red flag when it comes to this invoice aging. Notice we have invoice numbers 1159, 1160, and 1161 over the course of March 2024 all the way to August 2026. So does that mean that the site has only sent 3 invoices in like 2-3 years? That is a red flag. That would tell me that this site is not invoicing properly, that they probably should have had a lot more invoices sent than normal. And that brings me to this point. Serialize invoice numbers. So you have to make sure that you work with your organization to decide if you want to create a serialized invoice number by site, which means that all of the trials come together to create a single serialized list, or, and as I've seen this in many of the CTMSs, they start to create a serialized numbering system by trial. So many of the CTMSs are going to work in a way so that every single trial is like its own little business. They don't mix all of the invoices together. So be sure that your finance team knows the direction you want to go on this. Are you, and how you're going to number your invoices, not just for a trial, but you need to make sure that you almost have like an invoice creation SOP so that you know that everyone is on the same page to keep track of your invoices. Okay. And by the way, you should really be sending much more than 3 invoices in 3 years. All right. So that is the end of invoicing. Super duper like boot camp. There's so much more to it. We could talk about invoicing forever. What is your favorite invoice story? Is there something that you do in invoices that it's super, super important? Let me know. Offline, send comments, whatever it might be. Help your fellow site with invoicing. This is a major, major part of loss of money for a site, and we need to help each other. So next week, now that we've got the accrual for auto pay and invoicing in the system, we've got some AR, we've got to start managing and tracking it. We're going to go over aging, specifically talking about what is late and how to recover it. All right. It's coming, everyone. It's coming a lot faster than you know. October 15th through 17th, SCRS, the Site Global Solutions Summit, booth 920. We're going to be there. CRPN's got a booth. We've got a board game. Come try it out with us. Come see if you can negotiate as a site or a sponsor. Are you going to win? Is anyone going to win? So come check that out. And if you want to meet up, let me know. I know for a fact that every single SCRS gets super crazy busy, and it's going to be a blast. Looking forward to seeing my friends. All right, website, LinkedIn, YouTube. This is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe, share your voice. See you next time.